Today in the EU, how the French political impasse is undermining Macron in Europe. 2 months after snap elections, France remains still without a coalition or prime minister-elect, despite 5 days of government consultations. This political deadlock is testing the resilience of President Emmanuel Macron's political capital, with the country facing a deficit of around 5.1% of its GDP. What are the plausible reasons behind this delay, and what are the names proposed for the prime minister position? Hello and welcome. I am Evikiori, and this is Today in the EU. To understand better what is happening with the turmoil in France, we are joined by our Paris-based politics and economy reporter, Théo Bourgery-Gonse. Hi Théo, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Evie.
So you're right now at the forefront of everything that is happening in France. Frankly, you're following the situation from the ground, as we can hear in the background. And it's true that we haven't discussed the political situation in France in a while now, waiting for a definitive answer on the details about the next government and prime minister. But nothing yet. Why is France still under political gridlock?
Yeah, so to best understand that, we have to go back to EU elections night, where the far right came first with a landslide win, securing some 31% of the votes. Emmanuel Macron's camp was a distant second, with half the number of votes as the far right, in what many considered a crushing defeat. And on the back of that, the president called for snap legislative elections, citing, I quote, a badly needed time of political clarification. And the outcome of that snap election is a political landscape that is more fractured than ever. You've got a left-wing union, the New Popular Front. They came first in the race with just over 190 seats in the National Assembly, but 100 seats short of an absolute majority. And Macron's party halved his seats in the National Assembly, and the far right made some comfortable gains. Since then, no clear majority has seen light of day that could be certain to survive a vote of no confidence. So coalition governments are not the norm in France, and neither is consensus building, which adds to the whole confusion. And a caretaker government has been in place for almost 50 days now, and that's unprecedented since the end of the Second World War.
And Emmanuel Macron addressed the issue from Serbia, where he was, stating, "I'm doing everything I can, day and night, to find the best solution for the country."
Croyez bien que je fais tous mes efforts, et les jours et les nuits, et que je le fais depuis des semaines, même si vous ne l'avez pas forcément vu.
Macron has been leading the charge to find the right fit for a new prime minister who, I guess, would have the necessary political gravitas to put a government together. But oppositions accuse him of taking on a role that institutionally isn't his. And the left-wing union has warned against a denial of democracy.
At the same time, there have been speculations that French President Emmanuel Macron is extending negotiations as long as possible to impact the vote on the budget for the year 2025. Already next week, the National Assembly is supposed to kickstart the process of selecting the special advisors on said budget. So when is the final deadline to legislate on it?
So just to take a step back, adopting the annual budget is one of the country's most high-profile political moments. It gives a sense of where priority policies lie, what the government will and will not focus on, etc. And it's also needed just to make sure that all civil servants are paid and avoid what the Americans call a government shutdown. In France, the budget bill must land in Parliament on the first Tuesday of October at the latest. So that's 1st of October this year, for final adoption scheduled in December. And this means that all preliminary documents must be drafted and key financial arbitrages taken over the summer, which obviously wasn't possible this time around because a caretaker government isn't mandated to make these decisions.
Looking at the most promising profiles, the name of Lucie Castet has been flaunted by the leftist coalition. What other names are out there?
Yeah, so Lucie Castet is the woman the left-wing union managed to adopt as their candidate for prime minister. She was no public figure before then, and she was leading the work on budget for the city of Paris.
Législative, le nouveau Front populaire, dans son programme, dans ses mouvements comme dans les personnalités qui l'incarnent.
Rassemblement National leader Jordan Bardella voiced his opinion last week to the prospect of a nouveau Front populaire prime minister, arguing that it poses a danger due to the party's program and goals.
And I should say that Macron has ruled out earlier this week to ever appoint her as prime minister, arguing that she would never survive a vote of no confidence.
Déjà, je pense qu'il est absolument indispensable de rappeler que la personne qui bloque le pays aujourd'hui, c'est le président de la République.
Nouveau Front Populaire candidate Lucie Castet addressed the rejection on the French public radio channel France Inter, stating that it's crucial to recognize that the one holding the country hostage today is the President of the Republic. This is something we must not forget, she said.
Now, there are many other names going around, but one seems to stick, and that's Bernard Cazeneuve. He already served as prime minister in a short stint at the end of François Hollande's term in office in 2016 and 2017. And in the past, he's held a number of ministerial posts, including EU affairs, budget, and home affairs. He was a historic member of the Socialist Party until he broke ranks in 2022 over the so-called NUPES left-wing alliance, which brought together the Socialists with the Greens, the Communists, and La France Insoumise, which at the time was deemed way too radical to ally with. And Bernard Cazeneuve left the Socialist Party as a result of this alliance. He's since returned to practicing law, all the while running his own, frankly, embryonic political parties, La Convention. And that's probably the most serious name that we have to date as to who could become the next prime minister. Other names that have been floating around, they include former Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier, a historic right-wing Les Républicains figure Xavier Bertrand, and you finally have Didier Migaud, who could be more of a technical choice rather than political one to Macron, and he's the former president of the French Court of Auditors.
And Théo, you've been in touch with MEPs here in Brussels to discuss what the French impasse looks like from across the border. What did they have to say?
I mean, the main message that's come across is we are confused. The French presidential system is fairly unique in Europe, and MEPs aren't too sure what's preventing parties from entering into coalition talks. Coalition building, while unprecedented first in France, is rather common in other European countries. And it's also normal that talks take weeks, if not months. Coalition negotiations in Belgium and the Netherlands are cases in point. So I was talking to an MEP, actually, a socialist MEP today, who said that she spends most of her time just trying to explain what's going on and trying to explain why it's so complex to get to a coalition government. And there is one question that seems to be on many non-French MEPs at the moment, which is, can that situation, if it were to last, dent Macron's EU stature in the long run?
Now it's been 50 days and still counting. Do you think France's turmoil is affecting Emmanuel Macron's EU reputation and weakening his European influence?
I mean, that can really go both ways. So, on the one hand, the president has never been so weak politically. He's likely going to spend more time handling domestic matters at the cost of EU engagement. And other European leaders, they know this. They know that he's weak. Then key promises, and I'm thinking of the 100 billion euros defense fund for Ukraine, that could be thwarted as the country's finances become unviable. And France might need to get its own house in order before asking for more cash. From a very day-to-day and practical perspective, I mean, file negotiations will be made all the harder as coalition government ministers, some of whom will be from parties other than Macron's, will sit at the Council of the EU. And then, of course, the transposition of EU regulations into French law, for example, on the Green Deal, could be prone to more political maneuvering, especially under a right-leaning coalition government. That said, there is nuance to be added to this. First of all, consensus making, even if it's slow, even if it's complicated, that's no bad thing. It's a sign of a healthy and vibrant democracy. And some of Macron's key policies he outlined in his Sorbonne speech in April, including boosting EU businesses' competitiveness and implementing the Migration Pact, that could actually experience increased support under a right-wing coalition. And then finally, there's the political reality of other member states, of the likes of Germany, Italy, and Spain, and that's pretty complicated too, such that actually, despite the political deadlock that France is in right now and Macron's potential loss of influence in the EU, there's no one really today able to replace him.
And how do you see this situation panning out? I would assume that the first thing is Macron nominating a candidate, but after that, what can we expect?
I mean, we're still very much in the blur at this point in time. But what's likely to happen, and that's according to a few Élysée officials that we've had the chance to talk to, then starts the long and complex work of making sure that there is a coalition government that can be built, a multi-party coalition government, or that whatever minority government gets put together does not fall after a vote of no confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And what's for certain is that EU partners, as well as markets, will be watching closely the outcome of these negotiations, especially as Commission work gets underway and in order for the new term. The political deadlock and the political complexities of France will be very closely watched by all our allies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for breaking this down for us, Théo.
Thank you, Abby.
I am Evie Chiori, and this was Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. You can get in touch with us by leaving a comment or a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us a lot to spread the word about our work, but also understand what topics you like listening to. This episode was produced by Miriam Sáenz de Tejada, Nicoleta Yonta, and me. Thank you for tuning in, and until tomorrow morning. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.